trying to figure out the crime scene, what really happened, but in history. Okay, so God supposedly said in the Quran, or Muhammad, "And thus we have revealed to you an Arabic Quran, that you may warn the mother of cities." And then they have written Mecca. But the thing is this mother of cities really Mecca? Mecca is only mentioned one time in the Quran. Not going to show that now, but what it most of the time says, it says this word: "Verily, the first house of worship appointed for mankind was that at Bakkah." And here they say Mecca, full of blessings and guidance for Al-Alamin, the worlds, all the worlds, the mankind and jinn. So it's that the word Mecca is only once in the Quran. Most of the time, what it says is Bakkah or Masjid al-Haram or something. So now I'm going to read from Tom Holland's In the Shadow of the Sword. "Given that the Prophet's earliest biographers were writing almost 2 centuries after his death, how far can we legitimately accept their presumption that 7th century Mecca was genuinely a place of great significance and wealth, the mother of cities? It's plausible enough that it might have been a center of pilgrimage for the local pagans, but that it ranked as the Dubai of its day, a prosperous and cosmopolitan trading hub brought to flourish in the depth of the desert, is most certainly not. What incentive could there possibly have been for anyone with an eye for a profit to base himself in a barren valley many hundreds of miles from the nearest consumerist fleshpot? Even the few camel train that still plodded northward from Himyar, heading for a Roman market that had long since lost its appetite for incense, went by a road that bypassed Mecca altogether. A merchant from Alexandria might cheerfully discourse about the trading opportunities in the entrepot as far afield as India, and never even so much as allude to Mecca. On his doorstep it effectively was. In Gospels written by Muhammad's contemporaries, whether diplomats, geographers, or historians, mentions of it is noticeable by its glaring absence. Even in the Quran itself, the word appears just once. In the belly of Mecca, it was God who held their hands back from you. An illusion that might as well be to a valley as to a city. Otherwise, in all the vast corpus of ancient literature, there is not a single reference to Mecca, not one. Only in 741, more than 100 years after the Prophet's death, does it finally crop up on the pages of a foreign text. And even then, the author locates it in Mesopotamia between Ur and Haran. You can see Ur is this. This is where Abraham supposedly lived when his name was Abram. And Haran is there. So somewhere in between, he locates Mecca somewhere in between this area. Clearly then, whatever else Mecca might have been in the early 7th century, it was no multicultural boomtown. And then I skip to a later part of the book, same book. As with the reputed birthplace of the Prophet, so with the compendium of his revelations. There is not a single mention of it in the writings of the period. In the first flush of the Ishmaelite takeover, a patriarch of Antioch assumed that his new master's holy book was the Torah. Such a presumption, of course, might well reflect nothing more than a willful blindness, except that it was far from being confined to bishops. More than a century after the death of Muhammad, Muslims, as they were now starting to call themselves, might betray a very similar ignorance. Even as Christian bureaucrats tracking the peculiar beliefs of their Arab overlords began to note the existence of various frivolous composed by Muhammad, Muslim scholars, in their concern to identify precisely what the Prophet might have thought, was still perfectly capable of overlooking the Quran altogether. Blah blah blah. And then I'll skip later part in the book. What the Constitution of Medina does not tell us, however, now he's talking about the Constitution of Medina and how the Constitution of Medina is plausibly, or most historians think it's accurate, or it's a real historical document. What the Constitution of Medina does not tell us, however, is where the Muhajirun had originally come from, nor does it reveal precisely whom they felt called upon by God to fight. Most regrettably of all, it sheds no light on how an alien stitched together in a remote oasis might conceivably have expanded to embrace the whole of Arabia, and then to take on the world. Nevertheless, its very existence would seem to suggest that the hard core of Muslim tradition may truly derive from the time of Muhammad, and have stood proof, after all, against the weathering effects of time. Conflict between the upstart Ummah and the Quraysh eventually compromise on both sides, and the agreement between them of a treaty, a brutal crushing of the new confederation of any Arab tribe bold enough to stand in its way. Such a process of state building seems at very least plausible. And if accurate, then it would imply that there may perhaps be other clues preserved in the stories told centuries later of the Prophet's career as to how and why, as if from the blue, the imperial authorities from both Syria and Iraq were overwhelmed by precisely the kind of Arab federation hitherto had always been theirs to sway. Even though Muslim tradition would cast the conflict between Muhammad and Quraysh as a struggle for control of Mecca, this tradition itself contains hints of a suggestively alternative one. Particularly striking, for instance, is the number of leading Qurayshi dynasties who, despite supposedly being based in Mecca, are said to have purchased estates in Syria during the Prophet's lifetimes. So people from the tribe of Quraysh, Muhammad's tribe, purchased estates in Syria, or the Arabic word is probably Sham, because that's the word they use. Sham is maybe more Levant, so it's the whole area of this. The Byzantine area of Syria was pretty much all this, what we today call Levant, I think. An example of long-distance property speculation, which, if genuinely conducted from the Hijaz, would have no precedent in the entire span of Roman history. Previously, whether along the Rhine or in Armenia, the only barbarians who owned land on either side of the imperial frontier were those who directly bordered it, all of which would seem to apply a rather awkward conundrum. Either the Quraysh, the tribe of Muhammad, truly came from Mecca, in which case they could not have owned property in Roman territory, or else they owned property in Roman territory, in which case they are unlikely to have come from Mecca. Of these two alternatives, it is clear that the second is the likelier. Even on the evidence of Muslim tradition itself, the obsession of the Prophet of securing the border zone south of Palestine is manifest. With a single exception of Mecca itself, all the targets of his campaigning, all the objects of his military ambitions are said to have lain in this region, the stretches of desert that the Roman Arab allies had always traditionally patrolled. So this is a map of the Byzantine war between, or that time's great war between Byzantine and Sassanid. And here you can see where the border of Byzantine Levant province ended. I make a big jump in the book. Ibn al-Zubayr, as grim and austere as ever, had very publicly refused to take the oath of allegiance to the new Amir. This is when the Umayyads has a new Amir. As a result, he, rather than any relative of Ali, had emerged as the most prominent opponent of the Umayyads. Tempers in Medina were not helped by the fact that Yazid, who representative in the Oasis, was no other than the fabulously venal and slippery Marwan. The locals' mistrust of their new governor ran particularly deep. I'll skip a few lines until they say, by 683, so this is the Prophet allegedly died 632. By 683, they had broken down the negations between Abdullah ibn Zubayr and the Umayyads. Abdullah ibn Zubayr damned the new Amir as a usurper. As Marwan fled Medina for Syria, Yazid sent a task force in the opposite directions. And then I'll skip a few lines. The stories of what happened next grew ever more blood bolstered with telling. The city of the Prophet, i.e. Medina, it is said, was put to the sword by the Umayyads. For 3 days and 9 months on from the sack, over 1,000 babies were born. Ibn al-Zubayr, however, was not among the dead. Implacable in his piety, full of threats against the Syrians, who he claimed were transgressors of the law, he had resolved to take a stand that would truly challenge his opponents, to do their worst. Accordingly, rather than wait in Medina to confront Yazid's strike force.
So what time frame are we at now?
Now we're in the 680s. To confront Yazid's strike force, he had headed for a spot that was even more redolent of holiness, the house of God, Baytullah. But the question is, where is this house of God? Muslim historians, writing more than a century after the fact, would take for granted, of course, such a sanctuary was to be identified with Mecca. But nowhere in the writings of contemporaries is this actually said. Instead, all is studied indeterminacy. He came to a certain locality in the south, where their sanctuary was, and lived there. So wrote one Christian chronicler about Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Evidently then, the precise location of the Arabs' desert shrine remained as much a puzzle to outsiders as it had ever been. Nevertheless, there were certain suggestive clues. It was noted by one bishop, for instance, that the Muhajirun of Iraq, when they bowed to pray, did so towards the west, toward the Kaaba, the primordial wellspring of their race. This is a quote from the same bishop, I think. While those in Alexandria turned to the east. So these guys, they are, I think, located in Kufa, and the other guys in Alexandria. So they are facing the west, and they are facing the east. Where is Mecca, supposedly? Mecca is down here. So to say that these guys are facing the west and these guys are facing the east doesn't make sense. Muslim tradition, too, rather staringly recorded something rather similar. The founder of the first mosque in Kufa, so it was said, had fired an arrow to determine the Qibla, the direction of prayer, and it had landed not to the south of the mosque in a line with Mecca, but somewhere to its west. So then you can see they are in Kufa firing an arrow someone's to its west. So here is Medina and here is Mecca down to the south. So they're firing it to the west. Where could it be?
So did he just fire it to the west just randomly, or was he firing it towards the west to a particular place?
To show the Qibla.
Right. Okay. But yeah, I understand that. But shooting the arrow, was it a random? I'll just shoot in the westerly direction, or was he aiming at something specifically? Is that what?
No, he was up in the air.
He was firing to. The founder of the first mosque in Kufa, so it was said, had fired an arrow to determine the Qibla, the direction of prayer, and it had landed not to the south of the mosque in a line with Mecca, but somewhere to its west. So although no contrary tells us exactly where Ibn al-Zubayr took refuge, the weight of evidence would suggest a location to the north of Hijaz. Hijaz is like, or even that, what Hijaz is kind of, Hijaz today is the region of Mecca and Medina here, midway between Kufa and Alexandria. So you can see on the map where is midway between Kufa and Alexandria. Since this is precisely the region with which Muhammad himself appeared to be most familiar, if you read the Quran, and since Ibn al-Zubayr was consciously aiming to defend the Prophet's legacy, the likelihood must surely be that the house of God in which he barricaded himself stood not in Mecca, but between Medina and Palestine, and that in that blessed place named by the Prophet as Bakkah. So you can see on the map, here is Medina, here is Palestine. So somewhere in between here should Bakkah be. Now we'll jump back to the book. Okay. In the 660s, some 2 centuries after Theodoret had first reported the Ishmaelites' pride in their ancestry, an Nestorian chronicler on the Persian border of Mesopotamia alluded to the existence of a mysterious doomed sanctuary, supposedly founded by Abraham and sacred to the Arabs. Indeed, the chronicler added, it is nothing new for the Arabs to worship there, for from the beginning, their earliest days, they have shown reverence to the father of the head of their nation. A most arresting detail for this is almost identical to what is reported in the Quran. There, in the passage on the house of Bakkah, the Prophet identified the man who founded it as having been none other than Abraham himself. Is it possible then that the sanctuary praised in the Quran as primal, the blessed place, was the same identical one known as far afield as Persia as the Dome of Abraham? And mention when we made the house a place of return for the people and a place of security, and this is important, and a place of security. I will explain later. And, O believers, from the standing place of Abraham, Maqam Ibrahim, and the standing place of Abraham, a place of prayer, we charge Abraham and Ishmael, saying, purify my house for those who perform tawaf, and those who are staying there for worship, and those who bow and prostrate. So this Maqam Ibrahim seemed to be similar to what this Nestorian chronicler said, that there is a Dome of Abraham. They know that there was a sanctuary in what is today Mamre, and Mamre is also mentioned in Genesis in the Old Testament.
Just bring up the map again so we can see where that is.
Mamre is here. So it's in Jerusalem. It's not far away, but this is like on the west bank near Hebron, or maybe the area is called Hebron. This is one of the places that I find suspect. Nor, in fact, is there anything in the Quran itself that would serve to contradict this universal presumption. Just the opposite, in fact. The Bakkah described by the Prophet shimmers with the same numinous aura that had long attached itself to another sanctuary, Mamre. It is the place where Abraham stood to pray, so the Prophet describes Bakkah. Of what then can this conceivably be an echo, if not the maqam, or certainly the Maqam Ibrahim? Certainly between the Hebrew word for place and its Arabic equivalent, there was a manifest resonance. Not surprisingly, because it's the same language family. And then another place in the book, back in the reign of Justinian, when a Roman ambassador had reported on the great desert shrine where even the wild beasts live in peace with men, he had included another intriguing detail, that it was sacred to the majority of the Saracens. Could this desert shrine be Mecca? The ambassador's description is so vague that it is impossible to say for sure. Nevertheless, a particularly intriguing detail among the prophet's many revelations does seem to echo the Roman report. The Quran reveals that Abraham and Ishmael raised to prayer to God as they labored to build the house of Bakkah. Make our descendants into a community devoted to you, which was, of course, to cast those descendants, the Ishmaelites, as something rather more than the sum of their parts, fragmented into various tribes they might have been, and yet were to be regarded, so it would seem from the Quran, as a single people, a community bound by a unity of purpose, joined by a common ancestry. What would they therefore share if not a good sanctioned partnership, a shirkat? And then it started to talk about Quraysh, and that's another clue in this whole story. So, like, what does this word Quraysh mean? No one really know what Quraysh means. It's a weird word in Arabic. Some scholars think it has something to do with sharks or something, but it's a weird word. In Syriac, which is was the lingua franca in a big part of this area, closely related to Arabic, Qarisha means shirkat, meaning Quraysh could shirka. It's like in sharika, meaning company. So it means you're sharing something. You have a shirka. It's the same word as shirk. You're joining partners with, so confederation, maybe you can say. Quraysh, could there be those tribes that were brought together in a common partnership as a federation to the new Rome? Meaning, could Quraysh be those tribes who was brought together in a common partnership, a federation to the new Rome? Like, they were brought there in a shirka to work for the Romans. This is a weird clue in the Quran. And indeed, Lut was among the messengers. So mention when we saved him and his family, all, except his wife among those who remained with the evildoers. Then we destroyed the others. And indeed, you pass by them in the morning and at night. Then will you not use reason? So you can translate it roughly as, you pass by them when you're in the early morning and by night. And it's commonly known that the Sodom and Gomorrah lived approximately in this area, so in the southern tip of the Dead Sea. So isn't this kind of weird? Like, here is Mamre. If they are living down here in Mecca, which is a way, like the distance here from there, it's a long bloody distance. So if they are passing by the site of Sodom and Gomorrah in morning and by night, like, what are they doing? It's a long trip.
But remember, they had flying donkeys.
But where were they going?
No. That is only Muhammad. He is talking to the mushrikeen in Mecca, or in mushrikeen in Bakkah, and he's saying, and you pass by their sides by day and by night. So isn't it a little bit far away down here in Mecca?
You don't know. Maybe they had a whole herd of flying donkeys.
No. It's only the prophet that flying donkeys.
Okay, but what's the point here? Who is moving there? Who's moving from one place to another there?
No. The point being made here is that the Quran says that you will pass this place by day and by night. In other words, all the time. But this is 1,000 kilometers away, so you can't pass this all the time if it's 1,000 k's away.
Gotcha. Okay.
It doesn't necessarily all the time, but it's suggested it's so often that it's like he's talking to the mushrikeen in Mecca and like making an argument. It is like I would say to you, like, you live in London, so I would say, and you pass by the London Bridge by day and by night. But if I would say someone that lived in Zurich, for example, I wonder who that could be. So nice. Talk to someone in Zurich, and you pass by the London Bridge by day and by night. Now I'm going to read from Robert Hoyland, which is another historian. In God's Path, say an interesting thing, but it may not be obviously directly why it's interesting. Okay, so I quote: "Whether true or not, Muhammad's West Arabian coalition did direct their efforts northward. They had already subjugated the nearby oasis of Khaybar in 628. There is Khaybar. And Fadak is just in the area. It's very close to Khaybar. Whether true or not, Muhammad's West Arabian coalition did direct their efforts northward. They had already subjugated the nearby oases, Fadak and Khaybar, in 628. But now they went much further to the north, challenging the Byzantine Empire directly. When Muhammad led this expedition to the north in 630, delegations were sent to other parts of Arabia inviting them to join forces with Muhammad. Medieval Muslim authors, in part wishing to play up the achievement of their prophets and in part striving to systematize their source material, claimed that these delegations succeeded, whether by diplomatic or military means, in winning all of the Arabian Peninsula to Muhammad's rule. By the time of his death in June 632, that subsequently many of its tribes apostatized and ceased and had to be coerced to return to the fold by Muhammad's successor Abu Bakr. This rebellion by the Arabian tribes, Arabic Ridda, required at least a year, 632 to 633, to quash. They say, and only then could the conquests, Arabic Futuh, commence in the 12th year in Muhammad's community, 633 to 634. One could imagine that tribes of southwest Arabia had begun to join the movement already in Muhammad's lifetime, especially when they saw how successful it was. But East Arabia is separated from the west by vast inhospitable desert. So here's in Medina, and East Arabia here, and here you have a very annoying desert you have to cross to get to East Arabia. But East Arabia is separated from the west by a vast inhospitable desert, including the aptly named Empty Quarter. And in any case, as we shall see further on, its tribes were already launching their own raids against Persia. It is more likely then that not that much of Arabia outside the western flank had been brought under the control of Muhammad's forces by the time of his death. So Robert Hoyland don't think that that all of Arabia was taken in Muhammad's lifetime. He only think that it was the western part of Arabia. Abu Bakr's task, therefore, was not to reconquer Arabia, but simply to conquer it, or at least to win it over to the movement's cause. Possibly he did not accomplish even this. This is the important part. For according to a contemporary Armenian chronicle, quote, only after the Arabs had invaded Syria and Iraq did they then penetrate with royal armies into the original borders of the territory of Ishmael. The territory of Ishmael meaning Arabia. So only after they conquered Syria and Iraq, after they conquered Levant and Iraq, only then did they penetrate with royal armies into the territory of Ishmael, meaning Arabian Peninsula. So this is weird, because if you think about it, if Mecca is down here, this should definitely be in the territory of Ishmael. But I think this is a suggestion, also another suggestion, that the original place of Mecca was as Tom Holland said, somewhere between Medina and Palestine, probably at the border of the Roman province of Palestine or Syria, somewhere in this area. Okay, so here's Surah Al-Rum. We said Alif Lam Mim. The Byzantines have been defeated, or the Romans have been defeated in the nearest land. But they, after their defeat, will overcome. But the important part is Fi Adnal Ard, in the nearest land. If we look at the map, the battle that, or actually, yeah, here we can look at the map. What is the nearest land? If, as Muslims believe now, that Mecca is down here in the deep Hijaz, the deep south of Hijaz, what would be the nearest land? Well, you have Najd, and you have maybe Yemen, but the nearest land, what are they talking about? Surah Ar-Rum. Okay, so Surah Ar-Rum, the Romans, is the 30th surah of the Quran. It consists of 60 ayat. The term Rum originated from the word Romans, and in the time of Muhammad referred to the Greek-speaking Romans Byzantine Empire. Hence, the title is sometimes also translated Byzantine. The surah begins by noting the recent defeat of the Byzantines by the Persians at the Battle of Antioch. The Battle of Antioch took place in 613 outside Antioch, Syria, between Byzantine army led by Heraclius and a Persian Sassanid army as part of the Byzantine Sassanid War, 602 to 628. Okay, so this is important. I've looked at like the different parts of this war and seen that could it possibly mean any other battle than the Battle of Antioch? But there's not really any battle that fits except the Battle of Antioch. That was like the major defeat. So if you look at where Antioch is now, it's like in this north part of what you possibly could call Sham or Levant. So here is Antioch, so here the Battle of Antioch took place. So remember when you're saying the Romans are defeated in the nearest land. Remember that this surah was sent down in Mecca, or whatever Mecca was, but it was sent down before the Hijrah. So this is where, then you can see on the map what could possibly be the closest land. So it's what it probably means is that they see the Levant as a whole as one land, which the Arabs, they always call Sham. They don't talk much about, that's the word that the Arabs use. So anything that borders on Sham could be said from the nearest land. Another clue from a surah that was sent down in Mecca, and it talks to the mushrikeen, the pagans in Mecca. Muhammad talks to, or God talks to the mushrikeen through Muhammad. So he says, He causes to grow for you thereby the crops, olives, palm trees, grape wines, and from all the fruits. Indeed, in that is a sign for a people who give thought. So when Muhammad is talking to or when God through Muhammad is talking to the mushrikeen in Mecca, he's talking to a people who have access to crops like palm trees and olives and grape wines. And when you think about where on earth can you grow such crops like grapes and olives? Well, down here in Mecca, you can actually do you can investigate the soil down there and see if it's possible, if ever such crops grew down there. And until this day, there is no evidence that any such crop could be grown there. In fact, there's not any evidence for any, like, this is not has never been a place, or never, but the last like 1,000 years it hasn't been a place for where you can grow olives and things like that, and grapes, which is a Mediterranean crop. I think the grapes naturally come from this area, Georgia or something like that. But so the original Mecca, the real Mecca, the historical Mecca, should be somewhere in an area where it at least back then was possible to grow such crops. And back then, through it was possible to grow in this area, Al-Anbat. The point is, the Nabatean kingdom was like before the Roman took over. That was like the major Arabic kingdom in ancient times. This is the Nabatean kingdom, and as you can see, Petra, as we call it today, Petra is actually, I think, is Greek. It's the same as, or is it Latin? I think it's Greek, but it's same like Petrus, on this rock, so it means a rock. So here you can see like the boundary of the Nabateans, and they are very important because the Arab cultures of the time of Muhammad was kind of a continuation of this culture. So here you can see Petra, and here is important for us, Al-Hijr, meaning the stone, or is that this is where you have Al-Ula and Madain Salih, which is one of the candidates that we will talk about. But now I will read once again from Tom Holland's In the Shadow of the Sword. Now, first I say this. Remember that Ishmael is central to the story of Mecca, and therefore also to the location of Paran, the wilderness that Ishmael and his mother had to flee to. Tom Holland writes, driven not once, but twice into exile by a resentful Sarah, the second occasion had followed the birth of Ishaq, when Ishmael and his hapless mother had been obliged to take up residence in the wilderness of Paran. The location of this particular desert was much debated, which some scholars, including St. Paul himself, identifying it with Sinai. So, Sinai. The overwhelming consensus, however, was that it could only have been Negev. Negev is this desert in today's Israel is not really a border that existed back then, but is this desert south of Palestine. No other wilderness stood closer to the sites associated with Abraham, Mamre and the search of St. Lot, and Hebron, where the patriarch lay buried, very close to Mamre, in a cave with Ishaq and Yaqub. Certainly, the Arabs of the Negev, when they accepted baptism, appeared to have particular enthusiasm for naming themselves Abraham, as though to remind their fellow Christians that they, unlike other converts, had been blessed by the marks of God's favor long before the time of Christ. The Quran talks a lot about like how Ishmael built the house, and also in the Sunnah they talks about like the whole story about Safa wal Marwa, for example.
Where's that?
Safa wal Marwa today is this Safa wal Marwa. Is the two mountains that you go between when you make Hajj or Umrah, these two. But I don't think that was the original Safa wal Marwa. I think they are fake. But according to the story, Ishmael was laying there when he was a baby, and you go between them to anyway, long story, but the point is the story of Ishmael and where this wilderness supposedly was is important for us when we want to understand what the historical Mecca was. Now we go into important thing about the Nabateans. So this I have called Dushara. Dushara Arabic, or Dushara Arabic, Dushara, Lord of the Mountain, also translated as Dusares, probably Greekified, a deity in the ancient Middle East worshipped by the Nabateans at Petra and Madain Saleh, of which city he was the patron. In Greek times, he was associated with Zeus because he was the chief of the Nabatean pantheon, as well as with Dionysus. But there's an important story about a temple of Dushara. This is, I steal it from this Dan Gibson documentary, what they say. Ibn Hisham one of those was a man known as Al-Tufayl ibn Amr of Mecca. He accepted Islam on one of his journeys, and once he returned home to Mecca, his wife also decided to accept Islam. At-Tufayl then tells his wife to go to the temple of Dushara and cleanse herself there. In the sacred area, there was a trickle of water where she could wash herself. She did this and returned home and learned about Islam. Anyway, so for those who know Arabic, you can read this yourself in Sirat ibn Hisham. So, وَكَانَ Dushara. So this is important because in the Mecca there was a temple for Dushara, and we also know that the Quran talks about like أَفْرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى. So haven't you seen Al-Lat and Al-Uzza? So Al-Lat is another god, and Al-Uzza. Oh, okay. Now I'll read again from Tom Holland's In the Shadow of the Sword. Always, however, there was only the one certain measure of holiness. A god could be reckoned no god who did not on occasion keep his sanctuary free of violence. At certain times in certain places, tribes who might otherwise have slaughtered one another with ferocious abandon would assemble upon grounds staked out as hallowed, haram, and there join in festivities quite as joyous and peaceable as those staged every summer at Mamre. Of the Arabs' major shrine, which lay surrounded by palm trees somewhere in the desert south of Palestine, and where the local people were reported to gather twice a year for a whole month or more at a time. It was rumored that even the wild beasts live in peace with men and among themselves. Not necessarily that pacifism were on the agenda whole year around. The gods of the deserts, away from their shrines, rarely objected to bloodshed. On occasion, they might positively demand it. At Hira, Al-Hira was an ancient city in Mesopotamia located south of what is now Kufa in south-central Iraq. Al-Hira was a significant city in pre-Islamic Arab history. For 7th centuries was a vassal of the Sassanid Empire, whom it helped in containing the nomadic Arabs to the south. The Lakhmid rules of Hira were recognized by Shapur II. At Hira, for instance, there stood 2 stones sacred to a god named Dushara, which his worshippers would regularly make sticky with gore. A second deity, Al-Uzza, the mighty queen, was graced with an even more spectacular draught of blood when Mundhir sacrificed no fewer than 400 Christian virgins in her honor. When Epiphanius, the same energetic cataloger of heresies, who has condemned the Ebionites, Ebionite is like a kind of Jewish version of Christianity, or I should say, has condemned the Ebionites, turned his beady eyes on Dushara. He reported that the god's worshippers, in a blasphemous parody of Christian beliefs, believed the deity to have been born of a virgin, a Qibla. The bishop, however, had misheard. Dushara was not a god of a Qibla, but of a Kaaba, a cube. The allusion was to a stone, black and uncarved, that the Nabateans worshipped as an incarnation of the god Dushara, somewhere in a shrine to the south of the Dead Sea. So this is a very important detail. Very important detail. Their major shrine, where they have this read again. But a Kaaba, a cube. The allusion was to a stone, black and uncarved, that the Nabateans worshipped as an incarnation of the god, somewhere in a shrine to the south of the Dead Sea. Sahih al-Bukhari. Narrated by Ibn Umar, when the Prophet ﷺ performed the tawaf of the Kaaba, he did the ramal during the first 3 rounds, and in the last 4 rounds he used to walk, and while doing tawaf between Safa and Marwa, he used to run in the midst of the rainwater passage. This is another important detail from Sahih al-Bukhari, and this thing exists in many different. Allah's Messenger said on the day of conquest of Mecca, there is no migration now, but there is jihad, holy battle, and good intentions. And when you are called for jihad, you should come out at once. Allah's Messenger ﷺ also said, on the day of the conquest of Mecca, Allah has made this town a sanctuary since the day He created heaven and earth. So it is a sanctuary by Allah's decree till the day of resurrection. Fighting in it was not legal for anyone before me, and it was made legal for me only for an hour by daytime. So it, i.e. Mecca, is a sanctuary by Allah's decree till the day of resurrection. Its thorny bushes, important detail, should not be cut, and its game should not be chased. Its fallen property should not be picked up, except by one who will announce it publicly. And its grass, another important detail, its grass should not be uprooted. Messenger of Allah sallallahu returned from he would also enter Mecca through the higher pass and would leave it through the lower pass. This lower pass, I don't know if that is the right translation. In Arabic it's a thaniya. A thaniya is like more like a crack, maybe you can say. Yeah, maybe pass is you can translate it, but I think a good picture that describes what a thaniya is this is a very narrow thaniya, but nonetheless a thaniya. This is from a particular city that we're going to talk about later, but this is a thaniya. Of course, a thaniya can be wider also, so you can say that.
Was that cut by humans or was that natural?
No, it's natural. This
Okay.
is cut by, I think it was cut by an earthquake. But a thaniya can be wider also, but it is a thaniya. So when he's entering Mecca, there is a thaniya that is entering. So there's another important clue. Thaniya. Here you have thaniya. Let's see where it was. So he made them sit. Okay, more passion. During those days, there was nobody in Mecca, nor was there any water. So he made them sit over there and placed near them a leather bag containing some dates and small water skin containing some water, and set out homeward. Ishmael's mother followed him, saying, "O Abraham." This is important again. Ishmael's mother. That's what I'm talked about, where this paran was. Ishmael's mother followed him, saying, "O Abraham, where are you going? Leaving us in this valley where there is no person whose company we may enjoy. No, nor is there anything to enjoy. She repeated that to him many times, but he did not look back. Her blah 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 proceeded. Abraham proceeded onwards and on, reaching the Thania. They used the word good. On they translate it as Thania. She repeated that to him many times, but she did not look back at her. She asked him, Allah's messenger ordered you to do so. He said, yes. She said, then he will not neglect you, and returned while Abraham proceeded onwards. And on reaching the Thaniya, where they could not see him. When reaching the Thaniya means he goes into the Thaniya and the person behind him can no longer see him. That means that it's a real Thaniya crack or a narrow pass. In the historical Mecca, such Thaniya existed, and such Thaniya exist in Wadi Rum and Petra. This is an important clue in this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. He faced the Kaaba and raising both hands invoked Allah, saying the following prayers. Our Lord, I have made. Okay, that's not the important part. But the important part, it describes Mecca having a Thaniya, and he's entering one Thaniya and going out another Thaniya and all this kind of stuff. Candidates for being the real historical Mecca. We start with what people today think is Mecca. So this is Mecca where it's today. So we can go down here. We can look at the different attributes. We can first look at, okay, Mecca was never mentioned on any trade route. It isn't mentioned until 741, and then it's not even placed there. It's placed somewhere between Ur and Haran, which is way in here between Ur and Haran. That time's Mecca, did it have olives and did it have grapes? Could you have any such agriculture there? Well, there's absolutely no historical evidence for that. There's no really historical according to hadith and everything. It should be the walled city, and it should be another part. We said that last week, but it's also called as Qura. It's called as the mother of all city, meaning this should have been a very important city that the mother of all cities. I don't know how you should say it. Like the original city and the you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, the cradle.
Yeah, there's no historical evidence. Another part that we mentioned last week is that it should be in a valley. And we can look at Mecca today. Is Mecca in a valley? I don't know. I mean, you have a mountain here, but if you're a valley, then it should be a mountain on two sides. I think to say that Mecca is in a valley is a stretch, to say the least. You have a mountain on this place. We talk about Thania.
It doesn't look like a big mountain. It's just like a bit of a hill.
Yeah, it's just a hill. Or they are quite big if you go back to big far away. But the thing is, the town of Mecca should be in a valley. And there should be a Thania, and a Thaniya, and he should be entering from one Thaniya, going out from another Thaniya. Another thing that you should be a water. That, of course, you can't see today because it's built over, but it should have been a water course like here. It should be in a wall city. Where is the wall? Where could they have built the wall? I don't know. There's a lot of things. It's impossible to grow anything that. When we talk about the nearest land, well, nearest land to Antioch, if someone is in Mecca talking to Mushrikeen in Mecca and he's talking about nearest land, well, there's to Antioch or to any place in Levant, to call that the nearest land is like, what are you talking about, dude? And there should have been a temple to the Shara and Al-Uzza. There's no one have found any remains of a temple to the Shara or Al-Uzza. Tom Holland talked about there should be a place south of the Dead Sea. Yeah, it's south of the Dead Sea, but it's kind of far away. It's when you look at the Quraysh that the Abbasid find, they didn't find them in Mecca, they find them more like in today's Jordan or in today's Jordan. So Mecca, today's Mecca, I think is a very, very bad candidate. It doesn't fit anywhere. Okay, now we're going to examine another. We go up here. We go to Al-Ula. Al-Ula is, or Madain Salih, which is very near to it. Al-Ula, I think, fits better than today's Mecca. If you look at the, going down here, Al-Ula could possibly be said that it is in a valley. Okay? And you could possibly say that you can enter from a thaniya. So
It's not a thania like you showed before, though, huh? So it's more metaphorical, right?
yeah, but you could. This is more plausible to say that it is in a valley, because you
Yeah,
have
that definitely looks like a valley, because
you have a little height and you have a
the
little
hills are
thing.
quite close, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Here we have remains, and this is where they the Quran talks about Thamud. So Thamud lived in this area. One thing about that, there's also an whole surah about it called the Surah Al-Hijr. And also this one, when you looked at the map of the Nabateans, this is like the location of Surah of Al-Hijr. So they talk about the Prophet Saleh and the people of Thamud that God punished, which is one of 4 Arab prophets according to Islam. Hud and Saleh and Shu'aib and Muhammad. So this is Saleh. The problem is this, that in the Quran it talks about this area, but it doesn't talk it in a way as this is the same as Mecca. So this is one of the reasons I don't think that Ula is the original Mecca. It fits better because it's more in a valley. It's at least a bit closer to Sham, but it's still not really good. And it's also in hadith that that the Prophet passed by Ula when he went to, I think it was the Battle of Tabuk or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but he went through Ula and he didn't mention Ula as Mecca. But Ula fits better. Maybe it's possible that they could have grown like olives and things like that, but even that is a stretch. So, but Ula is at least better than Mecca. Okay, we go up a bit. Okay, so Wadi Rum, history. Wadi Rum has been inhabited by many human cultures since prehistoric times, with many cultures, including the Nabateans, leaving their mark in the form of rock paintings, graffiti, and temples. In the West, Wadi Rum may be best known for its connection by British officer T.E. Lawrence, who passed through this several times during Arab blah blah blah. Lawrence of Arabia, dude. But this is a better candidate. Let us than any I have talked about so far. Wadi Rum. So if you look at this, Wadi Rum could be said. You can maybe say that there's a thaniya here. You can see there's a thaniya. You can say that it's in a valley. It's even called the Valley of the Moon. And I'm not sure there was a temple of Dushara, but since the Nabatean city, it's definitely plausible that it could have a temple of Dushara. By the way, Al-Ula had the temple of Dushara, as I mentioned. So that's also one that fits.
So far, is this your most favorite of the ones you've reviewed so far, or
as far as those are said so far, I would say Wadi Rum is one of the better.
Okay.
Because it's in Al-Wadi, you can have a Thani here. It's an old city, could possibly be called al-Qura. Maybe it was possible to grow some of the crops that is mentioned in the Quran. So that's maybe plausible. We take Abda. This is the place that Tom Holland goes to in his documentary in the Untold Story of Islam. So Abda is one of those Nabatean city. It's in the Negev desert. It fits in that way. This was, even although it's kind of desert now, back in the days of Muhammad, it was the desert was blooming here, all the crops they could grow and everything. And it could be plausible to say that Ishmael might have gone down here. The problem with Avdat, as you can see, is not really a valley.
Yeah,
It's
I was noticing that.
It's not really what Thania is he going to if it's going to Avdat. Otherwise, it fits kind of well. This is the one, if you just read by the Quran, it's plausible. Also remember this, maybe I can read that one more time. Indeed, Lut was among the messengers. So mention when we saved him and his family all, except his wife among those who remained with the evildoers. Then we destroyed the others. And indeed, you pass by them in the morning, musbihin, as I remember, this is when you are in the morning, is no really equivalence in English, and at night. Then will you not use reason? So Muhammad is in a surah Makkiyah, in a surah that is from Mecca, was sent down in Mecca. He's talking to the mushrikeen that they pass by the sites of Sodom and Gomorrah in the morning and in night. And here is the place where Sodom and Gomorrah lived. There's always even I think back then mentions of a church and everything back then. So we can look at the different things. Wadi Rum, is it possible? Well, maybe if they're down here in Wadi Rum and they're making business trips up here, it's possible that they pass by the sites by day and by night, although it's a bit far. If we look at the Ula, yeah, maybe, but I think it's a bit too far. Like, you have to remember that back in those days they traveled very slowly. Medina, Mecca.
Yeah, there was only one flying horse. There
was only one flying horse, and he was only available one night or so. So all the saying that someone down here in Mecca, which is away, you have to remember how long distances this is. When talking about Avdat, back to Avdat, it's possible that you can make the trip up there to the site of Sodom and Gomorrah and say that you pass by them by day and night if you're making business trips and things like that. But as I said, Avdat is not in a valley, it's not Thania, otherwise it fits well. Okay, we go here to Beersheba, today's Israel. This is a place I chose because this is a place where there was a well, the well of Abraham. And since we have the well of Zamzam and so on, this well of Zamzam is in the story of linked to the Ishmael story, that they found the well of Zamzam there. So this is something that maybe could fit. This is in a biblical site, and they talk about Abraham all the time, and this is kind of the border. The problem is, it's not really a valley, it's not Thania, and it should have been mentioned. And it's also like too far into the Roman territory of Palestine that it's not well, maybe south of the Dead Sea, but I don't think that. Here's another part, and that is Mamre. And Mamre could have been a very, very good candidate because the Quran talked about Maqam Ibrahim, as we read about last week. Here, this is a plausible place for the Maqam Ibrahim. There was a domed sanctuary here, which the Arabs were known to like even before Islam. So this could be a possible place for Maqam Ibrahim. I don't know if it's a valley directly, I don't think so. It's not Thania, but Mamre would have been a very good place if it wasn't for the fact that it's too deep into Roman territory. It's not really south of the Dead Sea. There's only this thing that we know that there was a sanctuary that was described very similarly to the sanctuary of the Arabs.
So not a good place then. It would have been a good place except for a couple of those problems. Not a good place. Okay, gotcha. Just making sure.
But I'm almost having that they kind of mixed things up and thought that Maqam Ibrahim is this, but then it like made it into Petra. You know, like in the Quran, they talked about Dhul Qarnayn, which is most likely, or this Alexander the Great, and he was turned into a monotheist while he was a clear pagan, a drunk pagan. So maybe they kind of mixed things up and thought the Maqam Ibrahim. I don't know, but the thing that talks for memory is that it is Maqam Ibrahim. The problem is it's not a valley, it's too deep into Roman territory, it's not south of Dead Sea, blah, 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 blah. If there's no temple of Dushara or Ursa there.
Okay, so we'll scratch that one out then, shall we?
Yeah, we have to scratch that one. Here is Medinatul Kirk. Al-Kark has been inhabited since at least the Iron Age and was an important city of the Moabites. In the Bible, it's called Kir Hareshethl or Kir Moab, and he's identified as having been subjected to Assyrian Empire in the books. What was that? The area eventually fell under power Nabateans. The Roman Empire, with support from the Arab Ghassanid tribes, the Ghassanai conquered it from 105 AD. The city was known as in late antiquity as Haraka. Blah, blah, blah. The Byzantine Empire, it was set as bishopric house, the most venerated church of Nazareth. This is an important detail. The church of Nazareth. Remember that the Quran talk about the Christian as Nasara, as Nazareth. What's it called? Nazareans. So the church of Nazareth was here. So that is remain predominantly Christian and under Arab rule. Well, fits quite well. It's Bishop Demetrius to blah blah blah. I don't know if there was any temple of Dushara, but it's possible it was a Nabatean place for a while. The problem is it's not in a valley. In fact, quite the opposite. It's on a top. It's on top of a hill, or whatever you call it. I don't know what Thania you're going through. Maybe if you had it down there back then, but the good thing about Karak, I don't know if you say it in English, is that it's very close to the sites of Sodom and Gomorrah. And now to also have the Rabba, is a town in Jordan, in Karak, governed an ancient Aeropolis. This is the name that you will see if you look at ancient map of this time. History. Rabba was formerly known as Rabat Moab. In Hellenistic and Roman times it was called Aeropolis. Its Greek name. It was one of the two leading cities of Karak Plateau at his time. Historical references. Aeropolis is mentioned by blah blah blah. Anyway, this was an old city and so on, and it's clear to the site. You might wonder, why do I go through all this? Because
you're keeping us in suspense here, aren't you?
Yeah, I could be, but while I go through the different candidates here, is because there are only so many candidates. Okay, like there's not an infinite number of towns around there that could be the town. So that's the reason why I go through this. Okay, so we're going to Rabbah. It's not really in a valley. What Thani are you going through? The only thing that fits it is that it's kind of not really south of the Dead Sea, but it's near the south of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's an ancient city, a Nabatean city. So it's maybe possible to grow some crops there, at least back then it was. But now we're gonna go to the notorious side. Petra. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, now we're at the ancient story of originally known as Nabatean Raqmu, is a historical and archaeological city in southern Jordan. The city is famous for its rock-cut architecture and water conduit system. Another name for Petra is the Rose City due to the color of the stone out of which it is carved. Petra is one of the new 7 wonders of the world, blah, 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 blah. Go near to history. By the 2010 BC, some of the earliest record formers had settled in Baida. What maybe is that? Baida. Oh, it's near to Petra. A pre-pottery settlement just north of Petra. Petra is listed in Egyptian campaign accounts and the Amarna letters as Pel, Sila, or Seir, though the city was founded relatively late. A sanctuary has existed there since very ancient times. The Jewish historian Josephus described the region, he lived after Christ, described the region as inhabited by the Medianite nation as early as 1340 BC, and that the nation was governed by 5 kings, whom the names was Rechem. The city which bears his name ranks highest in the land of the Arabs, and to this day is called by the whole Arabian nation after the name of its royal founder Rechem, called Petra by the Greeks. Oh, okay, that's Greeks. The architecture of Petra and other Nabatean cities was built during indigenous rule in early antiquity. So here you can see Petra. Petra, the good thing about Petra, it was like the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. It's an ancient city. It is definitely plausible to imagine yourself that someone living in the late 6th century, early 7th century, would call this town al-Qura. I think it was just, I don't remember if it was like 19 years or something before the Prophet was born. There's been a huge earthquake here, which has destroyed much of it. So it was not in its heyday, but it had once been a very important city. We also know that people made pilgrimage to Petra before Islam. We know that there was a temple of Dushara. I think it's this one you can see here. And we know that was a temple for Lat and Wal-Uzza, and the god Lat and Uzza. As we can see, Petra is in a valley. As we can see, Petra has Thania. Here you can both call this a Thania, but they also have this smaller Thania going like cracks in between those things. Annoying that it doesn't go from top.
Doesn't look like it's very modern though. There's nobody living around there now.
No, not there. It was also it disappeared. I think it was a Swiss dude that discovered it back some time. But anyway, we know that there was a street that cut this town in two. You can still see and in this street was a rainwater pass, as we saw in that hadith. Petra back then had surrounding of agriculture, so it's what was called cultivatable land. Yes, 100 years ago you could have more trees and so on. Yeah, there are still some trees and things like that, but back in those days, in the same way as Avdat, as we saw, is not really have any cultivation today, but back in those days they have cultivation. It's possible to grow olives. It's possible to grow figs and grapes and stuff. If you look at, it's not that far from the site of Sodom and Gomorrah, so it's possible that if you're going trade, you're having trade trips up here, it's definitely possible that they go there by day and by night. At least those who often go on, and it was a trading hub, and it's very possible that Safa or Marwa they go up like this and this mountain. What more does it? What haven't we mentioned? It's south of the Dead Sea. It fits perfectly south of the Dead Sea. It's on the border of was then the Roman province of Levant. It fits perfectly in that way. It's at least possible to say that someone living there in 613 would say the Romans are defeated in nearby land, as you have there. The kind of in Petra you had both pagans and you had Christians, and like the Romans took over this place, but you have a mix between pagans and Christians, which fits perfectly. I don't know what have.
Is there anything in there that doesn't fit, that's got a question mark, or does it fit all the criteria you mentioned?
Maybe you could say like this Maqam Ibrahim. Maybe that should be linked to memory, but otherwise, it's possible that they would say that, but Abraham visited here too. It's definitely plausible because not so far away from where Abraham played around, and his son Ishmael. It's definitely possible that he went down here, in their eyes at least, and that's the important part. So
based on all the research and the reading you've done, would you say that's the most likely candidate?
yeah, I would. If I had to bet my money on something, I think I would bet my money on Petra. Yes.
But it's strange that it became deserted. So is there anything else you want to add? Because that's been really awesome.
That before, I was very skeptical to Petra before I made this research, before I began, because I was very skeptical to Dan Gibson as a person. So it was kind of an ad hominem. My real argument against Petra was a kind of ad hominem one. But after I have looked down to the different candidates and looked everything, I realized that there can't have been that many places that there's not that many candidates, and most of those places can be ruled out. As I said, it's maybe plausible that you can say that it's Wadi Rum.
Did you in your research find out who and why they chose Mecca, the Mecca that we know today, as opposed to?
Well, that was, I think, was a political move. Like, if this story is correct, then Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he fled from Medina up to Petra, which he thought was the holy city, maybe, if this is the correct, or Wadi Rum or whatever it was. Then, he destroyed the Kaaba, dug out the black stone, and then had to flee down to the south somewhere. And maybe he then settled down in Mecca.
And when was this then? What sort of time frame? After Muhammad's death or during his life, or when?
No, we're talking about the time of Al-Hajjaj and Abdullah ibn Malik ibn Marwan.
Time frame for us that don't know those people?
Now we're talking 680s to...
yes, after Muhammad's death.
Yes, between 60 to 90 years after Muhammad. And then if you look at the coin, like my original avatar for this was Caliph coin. Mm-hmm. So this is the avatar I had there. There's a coin of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and that was an image, but that was before, an image of him before he kind of made up his mind. But what he probably realized from Abdullah ibn Zubayr was that the power of this guy Muhammad. So since they probably realized that Al-Quds or Jerusalem is too much associated with the Jews and the Christians. So the Ishmaelites needed their own sanctuary. And first their sanctuary was in Petra, but since Petra was kind of destroyed and everything, it was much more fitting to place it down here in Mecca, since maybe Abdullah ibn Zubayr maybe even brought the black stone down there anyway. And then they started, so Abdul Malik ibn Marwan kind of started it, but then it took a kind of a long time. But when the Abbasids took over, then it kind of had been established in Mecca, and then it was kind of beneficial for the Abbasids to place it in Mecca. So then they just continue like that. But it was also very convenient, because then you could put the prophet in the middle of the desert, and you could say it is not plausible that he could get all this information from anyone but God, because he was in the middle of the desert where there was only pagans and blah blah blah. But yes, then everything become mixed up. So they said that Mecca is Qura, but there was nothing really there. And then Petra was kind of forgotten and like sunk into oblivion, something like that, and so it was very convenient. And Petra was kind of abandoned, suspiciously enough, in the, I think it was in the mid 8th century, which is kind of suspicious as well. Another suspicious thing that one said in chat that I thought about, and it's actually true, it's very weird that Petra isn't mentioned any time in the Hadith. I mean, Petra was the bloody damn capital of the Nabatean Empire or kingdom. It was an extremely important place, and then just suddenly just disappeared. It is as if someone had an incentive to make it disappear and make Mecca here. So yeah, I have changed my mind. I used to think that it wasn't Petra because I had an ad hominem argument for myself that I didn't trust Dan Gibson, and I still think that he says things like in that documentary, like Masjid al-Haram. He says the forbidden gathering place. It's correct that it was a gathering place and it had an area that was haram. That is correct, as I read from the Tom Holland's stuff. But masjid comes from the word sajada, which means prostrate. So it's more correct to say that it's in a place of prostration. So he says things that are kind of bordering on, he's not doing it in a more dispassionate way as I do it. Maybe it's not as fun to listen to me, but anyway, what I want to say is that I think I have changed my mind. Actually, I was very skeptical of Petra, and mostly because I had an ad hominem argument against Dan Gibson as a person. But when I look at the evidence, I actually think that Petra is the best alternative.
Cool. Thanks so much, Abu. That was awesome. And wow, you've obviously reminded yourself that we look at the evidence and not the person. Sometimes that's hard to do, obviously, to separate person and information, because that particular person delivers it. You go, well, I don't like the person, so I might dismiss the information. So it's good you reminded yourself of that. But that's awesome. So
no, we simply do not know. We do not know why Petra, being a Nabatean capital, should at the same time be the capital for Muslims. I mean, you need to remember this came about from Damascus. So Damascus was looking for some obscure place to make this a place of worship. That they didn't really want a well-known place, I think. They wanted it just like the Christians took Nazareth, which didn't even exist at the time. They wanted some obscure little place. And I think Petra would have been too imposing.
Yeah. But look. That's what I'm saying. I think we know that Arabs made pilgrimage to Petra before Islam, and it fits all this thing where they had the Temple of the Shara, and it's mentioned that the Arabs had a temple south of the Dead Sea. But when the Arabs got into power, they had incentives to move it down to Mecca because they wanted it.
I agree. No, because look, in Petra, you had all these statues. You had the goddesses, like all these different gods and shrines and all these things, which obviously Islam wanted to avoid. So there was definitely reason to move it away from there.
And another thing is that the Quran talks about a lot of like earthquakes and things. And there's even a surah called Surah Al-Zalzala. And Petra had many earthquakes. There's also this Wadi Bakkah. It's called Bakkah in the Quran all the time, except for one place, which probably is changed.
question for you quickly, Abu. You, what a mate is asking, did you cover Kufa? And you did, didn't you, earlier on, but you also covered in the previous part, didn't you?
Yeah, but Kufa doesn't really fit. I didn't bring it up as a candidate.
No, not one of these cities, no.
But what I did, I brought up Al-Hira, because there at least we know that there was a temple for Dushara. The only thing that could be, Al-Hira. The only thing that Al-Hira fits is that this guy, that's the first time Mecca crops up is in 741, and then he placed it somewhere between Ur and Harran, and Hira is like here somewhere, in this area somewhere. I don't know if it's this one. No. Anyway, in this area somewhere, and that's maybe. But the thing is, too. First, it's not a valley, and it's too
It doesn't meet
far.
the criteria, does it? Yeah.
No, it doesn't. This is what is at Hira, for instance, there stood two stones sacred to a god named Doshara, which his worshippers would regularly make sticky with gore. A second deity, Al-Uzza, the mighty queen, was graced with an even more spectacular draught of blood when Mundir sacrificed no fewer than 400 Christian virgins in her honor. Here's the in the Bible psalm. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, who have set their hearts on pilgrimage. As they pass through the valley of Bakkah, they make it a place of springs. So there's a spring, maybe Zamzam spring. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. They go from strength to strength. Like between Safa and Marwa, till each appears before God in Zion. I don't know, but this is a psalm in the Bible that Muslims want to say that this is Mecca. But where is this Wadi? Bakkah means like in Arabic, Bakkah Yabki means crying. In Hebrew, it's something similar. So the valley of crying. But I don't know if this is the same valley as we're talking about.